Okay, thank you. Good morning. So yeah, I will be very brief, just doing the non-utility capital projects for Public Works, and then I'll hand it over to Mr. Como. My main reason for doing this is actually just because I wanted to show this picture of Mr. Como hard at work. I especially appreciate the facial expression that he's got on there. He's very intentional in his work. So there are really three areas of focus in the Public Works capital budget that are non-utility related. So livability and transportation is one area of focus. So if you look at page 11 of your capital sheet, this is the long spreadsheet that lists all the Public Works projects. Tab 5, page 11. So on page 11, there are a number of projects that are asset management. So those are all the light fleet replacement, etc. So I don't think we need to spend much time on that. I did, however, want to point out the WILI. So there's fleet and equipment renewal, and there is a WILI in there. And that is a very specific piece of equipment. It is replacing an existing skid steer. The skid steer is a less expensive piece of equipment than the WILI, but the WILI is far more versatile is the word I'm looking for, yes, and efficient. And so, yes, Councilor.
Skid steers are notorious for a short lifespan, I believe. Is it more robust than a traditional skid steer?
So we've had the existing WILI for 3 years now. And what's been the maintenance experience with it so far?
We haven't had too many repair and maintenance issues, but it's just regular preventative maintenance stuff. There's been no concern about it being a vehicle that is very costly to operate.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Which line item are you talking about?
So that is the line 178. Skid steer replacement, unit 23, and it's in 2020. So that is the more expensive skid steer replacement. If you were going through it closely, you would see that we have a couple of other skid steers in there that do not come with the same price tag. But this is a much more versatile, and especially for the winter snow clearing, this improves our efficiency dramatically.
Just before you move on, because from asset management, are there any questions? We don't want to not answer your questions on these. So if you have a question on a project, there's.
This includes stuff like the hook lift truck replacement, tool cat replacement, light fleet replacement. Those are all. So what was that? Last year or the year before, Council approved a fleet maintenance and replacement policy. That included a list of indicators as to when we should be turning over and essentially disposing of the old fleet and replacing it with new. So all of the replacements that are listed here are consistent with that policy, and they look at things like the age of the vehicle, the current maintenance costs, et cetera, as determining factors. An important note is that when we dispose of fleet, that does not actually show up in the budget. So we don't budget to, like if we sell an old skid steer, at the end of its life cycle, we may get a few $1,000s for it. We don't budget for that because we don't know what that number would be. If when we receive that money, it goes into the general capital reserve as just a transfer into the reserve. Yes, Councilor Cuthbert.
So,
Can you press your microphone, please?
some of these projects possible to be deferred, say, by a year? Or a couple of years?
I mean, with fleet management, it is always possible to defer. Again, what we're doing is we're following the policy and the guideline in terms of age of the vehicle, maintenance costs, et cetera. So if we defer, the risk of a breakdown or the increase in maintenance costs potentially go up, but there are things that could be deferred, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And it is an area where, and so this is an interesting point that this is often an area where municipalities will find some, is they will essentially run to fail. They'll have a policy to run some types of equipment to failure rather than life cycling them at a certain point. There are risks involved with that. The most extreme example of that risk was what happened in Fernie last year. So it's about finding the right balance between maximizing the value of the asset that you have and having a responsible replacement policy in place.
Okay, thank you.
So other projects that are in sort of in the livability and transportation side of things, so there's the playground replacement at Lions Park. What's interesting is that, so the playground there is also due to be life cycled out, but this is also meant to combine with the potential for an expansion of the tennis courts. What's interesting is that the playground replacement is fully funded, but the tennis courts project is not. So the tennis courts project is dependent upon fundraising by the tennis club, so that project is currently a D, whereas the playground replacement is not. The playground replacement is a B. So we are funding the playground, although we are not funding the tennis court at this point. The justification sheet.
For the playground?
Let me just see.
146.
Yeah.
Oh, the project number, John, is 146?
Yeah, the page number.
Yep, I'll just pull it up here. Give me a second. Yeah, it is, here it is. It is page 190, John.
Oh, that's
190?
the tennis.
That's the tennis court. Oh, sorry, the tennis court was 190, and the,
146 is Lions Park.
Yeah, okay, so that is the page number, not the project number.
right.
Awesome.
We're budgeting $2,500 for cookies.
Seriously?
That is
No. Okay.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Certainly.
If that playground goes in, does it go in the same place, or does it go in complementary to what's being planned for the tennis court expansion?
So the intent is to move the playground to be complementary with where the tennis courts would go in. And my suspicion is that we would probably have some conversation around with the tennis club to confirm that the tennis courts are going forward before making the final decision on what to do with the playground. So, and this is why I'm calling your attention to this, is so the playground is funded
Right.
because it's a town project, but it's still somewhat contingent on whether or not the tennis court project goes ahead.
Okay, so it'll be combined with future expansion?
That's right. So if it goes ahead, it will be planned to accommodate the future expansion of for the tennis courts.
There's a map that shows where it would be located there.
Okay. So there's a CFEP grant that the tennis club's applying for, right?
Yes.
And if that comes through, can the town mobilize that activity this year, or it all depends on when that grant comes through, I guess, right?
Yeah, it's really dependent on the timing of the grant and
Yeah.
the funding from the tennis club.
Okay,
So it is in the budget for 2019,
Right.
and it's included in our work plan. We would have the capacity to implement it should the funding come forward, but it is funding dependent.
okay. So it is included in the work plan, you do have the capacity, okay,
Yes.
thank you.
The other interesting point to note on the playground is the rubber surface replacement. So the rubber surfaces do represent a very much improved experience and safety component for the children playing, but they have a shorter life cycle. So the rubber surface lifespan is essentially 10 to 12 years, so we do have to replace those on a fairly frequent basis. Are there any other questions on the, yeah, Councillor Sanford.
Is that new playground going to be accessible? Are they looking at accessibility options?
Yes, so it will be accessible, and I believe we will go through our standard playground development process, which is that we will hire a consultant. The consultant will produce a number of different options, and then we will invite the community to come in and essentially comment and vote on which playground configuration they like best, and then we will move forward with it in that way.
That's what we did before with Grassy, right? And that was very successful?
Yes.
People got what they wanted?
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. The public very much appreciates being invited to participate in the design process in that way.
Great, thank you.
So back to page 11 of the capital summary, we basically run through the playground and the rubber surface replacement and then all of the life cycle equipment. Are there any other questions on that?
The,
Oh,
Lions-
Councillor Comfort?
So this is for the same area. The T-ball baseball diamond, are there plans for that? For making any change to it, putting something else there?
No plans to change that currently.
Or upgrade it or anything?
No plans to make any changes to it currently.
Sorry, that's at Lions Park.
Yeah,
In order to allow the expansion from 3 to 5 courts, the baseball diamond would be gone, actually.
okay, so okay.
Yeah, I did not know that. Okay, interesting.
Yeah, for the tennis court project to go ahead, there isn't a lot of space there. So the space that we've envisioned would include removing the ball diamonds where they're currently located, so there would be no more ball diamond at Lions Park.
Okay,
However, we do have a number of other ball diamonds around town. We would just need to move that one to allow the space for the tennis courts.
so to that point, part of me is really sad that for future parents of Camera will no longer be subjected to the torture that is known as T-ball. And part of me is really happy for that result.
well, they can be T-ball at the other court.
Yeah, they could,
I mean, my
But they're
kids
very-
played T-ball up in Elk Run,
but they're busy, see?
yeah.
Yeah, anyway, thank you.
Yes?
Sorry, so there isn't a drawing that shows that, Andreas, with the project, the Lions Park tennis court expansion? Did you say it would also eliminate the soccer field? I guess they're sort of one in the same?
No, the baseball diamond goes out, the outfield is into the soccer field.
Okay,
The expansion of the tennis courts does not affect the soccer field at all.
okay, thank you.
And then the last thing I want to draw your attention to, you see the slide up here.
Just
Sorry.
on the same topic, so the losing one ball diamond, to Esme's point, is that something that the ball players in town would be aware of, or?
I mean, right now, it's not booked. Most of any tournaments or regular play is done at Elk Run or out at the OLS field. That's where we see most of our, and Millennium as well. So we have still 6 other diamonds.
Right, so this diamond is, you're suggesting it's not really used?
Not formally, no.
Okay.
So, and then I want to draw council's attention just on page 12 of the capital summary. There are a number of D projects there that I just want to draw council's attention to. The to D or not to D, that is the question. So there are some future public washrooms and future dog parks that are listed there. that are currently D projects that are unfunded. And so we are proposing to leave those as unfunded for the time being. I just wanted to draw those to council's attention.
So again, a reminder that we had to go through and prioritize projects. So these may be community priorities or desires, but the funding envelope available for capital did not allow us to fund them. Should council want to see one or more of these projects proceed, we would be asking you to discuss or potentially remove or change another project that's currently funded to an unfunded project. The other way that these projects could move forward is if a funding source comes through mid-year. So if the tennis club comes forward and their fundraising initiatives allow them to proceed, or if we get granting available or other funding sources from developers, then we could potentially proceed with the project, but we would have to come back to you to share that information.
So, project one, the detail sheet, the line 192, I guess, is the D,
Yes.
with the 1.1 million for Quarry Lake.
Yes.
Is that related to the Olympics in any way?
No, it is not. So the couple of years ago, the Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation board had a Quarry Lake enhancement study done, and they essentially looked at and they did some consultation on what enhancements would be appropriate at Quarry Lake. Most of it is around parking lot improvements. Some of it is some additional tree planting, some additional picnic tables, a potentially additional washroom, those types of facilities to improve the experience at Quarry Lake. And so that study was led by the board. And we have then since gone out and administration worked with the board. We put in place an implementation plan. And now we are actually in the design phase of that work. Essentially, if the board is able to do fundraising and find funds to support this, we would move forward with this project. Again, it is included in the work plan and we have capacity to implement it. Because we are expecting at least some money from the board will come forward. And these are very much, like I said, about improvements to the existing user experience at Quarry Lake.
Okay,
But just to be clear, the Olympic budget would have
Helped.
delivered much of this.
Yes.
So especially the parking lot enhancements, the addition of some washrooms at the parking lot, the entranceway improvements to Quarry Lake, signage, that kind of thing was all part of the Olympic budget.
Okay,
Yes.
thanks for clarifying that.
Yes. Okay.
Sorry, so on that one, what is the cost sharing between the town and?
So the arrangement we have had historically with the Heritage Foundation was always that the foundation would provide the funding and the town would do the management and provide the implementation capacity. So there is, at this point, no intention for the town to provide dollars towards that 1.1 million. The current plan is for the town to provide the implementation capacity and then manage the facility afterwards. That's how, as it stands currently. So
Is that part of the budget, though? Is that budgeted, like the manpower in the
yes,
budget?
so we include the capacity to implement the project within the departmental work plan as our contribution to the project, but the funding to actually execute the hard costs come from the board.
Okay, thank you.
So the
Just
last
on-
thing I
on
want
that
to,
one,
yeah,
so if things should suddenly kick into high gear at the foundation, then that would move from a D project to
a B.
A B or something.
Yeah, that's right. So the only reason it's a D is because it is funding dependent,
Thanks.
right? So the last project that I want to draw your attention to is, and we spoke about this the last time, is we're actually, as part of the proposed org review and work plan for 2019 going forward, we're actually proposing to transition the sustainability coordinator and the wildlife position out of planning and into public works. So the coexistence roundtable implementation you actually find in the public works budget currently. And so that is on page 170 or line 170 there on page 11. And so currently we have $340,000 in the budget in 2019 to implement some of the high priority recommendations from the Wildlife Roundtable report, including fencing, green space fencing of a school within the town center, some Chaperdia removal, and other priorities from that report. So that will be work that will then be managed in Public Works on a going forward basis in 2019 if this is approved, as opposed to continuing to be managed in planning. Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, I had highlighted that because I wanted to know, there's no ongoing expense shown in future years. There's an expense in 2019 of $340,000, but then there's nothing beyond that. So I just wondered about that.
You'll see that on line 180. So it says Hummer Coexistence Roundtable and OSTP implementation 2020 and future years. So what we've done is we've identified, and this was to Lisa's point about making decisions about the capital envelope. So essentially on a going forward basis, we've allocated $50,000 a year to Roundtable report implementation priorities. And so in 2020, we have some projects identified, and then each year after that, it is a placeholder. And what may happen is we may combine that money to implement a project, so to do one project over 2 years worth $100,000, and there may also be other funding sources that we may look at. But based on what we know currently, there is still a lot of discussion about the future of the Roundtable and the technical committee and what that might look like. So it's a bit early in the process to be identify more than that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So that concludes the non-utilities discussion on Public Works. Are there any other questions on any specific projects that Council sees there? If not, then I will hand it over to Mr. Comeau.
Good morning. Okay. As mentioned, I'm here this morning to talk about the water utility and the solid waste services utility. So these are both budget areas that are not funded from taxes, that are 100% rate supported. So this morning's presentation, I'm going to go through the operating budget as well as the capital budget for each of these departments. And I'll also go through the utility rate model, which we utilize for both to demonstrate what that looks like. We should have more success this year than last year. We've got that macro issue sorted out, for those who remember. And so you'll get to see what that looks like. So beginning with the water utility, just as a background and reminder, in 2016, we did a utility rate review, and what we had determined is we wanted to split utility, water and wastewater out as two separate budgets. And the split, and it's mostly to do with the expenses and that we spend in each of those areas, is split 32% for water and the balance for wastewater. So we do spend most of our money on the wastewater side. So that's the split for that as far as revenue and expenses. And then beyond that, if you recall in your utility rate bill, you get a fixed rate, which is just to keep the system operating. And then you have a variable rate, which is a cost for the water that you actually allow into your home and to exit your home. And so we have the fixed is the ratio that we had determined in the utility rate review was to remain at 53%, and the variable at 47%. And so what that means is we count on 53% of the the budget, we count on coming from fixed or secured. We know it's going to be coming. And 47% is kind of an unknown because that's where it can fluctuate a little bit. But historically, we've seen that either be fairly level per account or growing with the number of accounts that we add to the system each year. The other thing we did do, and this will be the last year we talk about it, is the American Waterworks Association has a ratio. So when you look at your home, you get a 15 millimeter size pipe that comes into your home if you have a single family home. But we have meters that grow as the size of the buildings grow. So we have a 20, we have a 38 millimeter, a 50, 75, and 100. So as they grow, we have a different rate for those. And so the AWWA talks about a ratio. If you determine what your smallest one is, there's a multiplier for the ones that are bigger than that. So it's going to be 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, and you'll see a table what that looks like. When we did the review back in 2016, we noticed that the commercial sector did not have the correct ratio. And so essentially the residential sector was subsidizing the commercial sector for a number of years. To do a one-time correction was substantial for the commercial sector, so council today decided and accepted the idea of moving this over 4 years. So 2019 is the last year of doing that correction out in the commercial sector, and then everybody has the correct ratio, and then going forward, everyone's rates go up essentially at the same. But right now, the commercial is growing up significantly to make up for that subsidy. And the other thing we added was the incline block rate. When we were in front of council last time, we just had a little bit of data on that, so we've got a bit more information on what that looks like over the last couple of years, and you know, trying to understand, has this affected people's behavior or not? Do they just simply love water, need a lot of water? Or did the incline block rate, where we add a 20% surcharge, curb people's behavior? So we'll go through that as well. So here's that ratio I was talking about. You can see we began it in 2016. So when we started the process, this is where we were. So whatever the rate was, let's say if it was $1, the 20 milliliter meter size over here on the left-hand side, we would multiply it by 1.5. So what we really needed to understand was, what's our 15? And then based on that, what should the other ones be? So the 100 mil at one point was only 15 times the 15 milliliter millimeter service. And then and what we wanted to do, this is the AWWA target here, is what it should have been, is more like 25 times. So we took, you can see over 4 years to get there, we increased it, we went from 15 to 18 to 21, and these two here that are bolded are the last 2 corrections we need to make. So going into 2020, and you'll see those rates effectively are this increase at the same rate as the residential sector, or the 15 millimeter size pipe. Okay, any questions on that? All right, so when we begin the budget process after we get the guidelines from council, when we go through the utility rate model, which is the basis for how we determine all of our expenses and revenues, is we first determine what our expenses are. So that's the first step. And like I said, we'll bring up the model so you'll get to see that. We can play with it a little bit to see how one thing obviously can significantly impact something else. So we determine what our expenses are. We need to make sure that we identify all of those expenses. So one of the biggest expenses is around what we pay EPCOR to deliver our services, and some of the out-of-scope work like rehabilitation fund, etc. So we sit down with EPCOR, we determine what those are, what they should be going into the next budget cycle. We also understand that the system grows, so we make those changes as well. And so we identify all the operational expenses. Then we go through the capital plan, and that's a back and forth process, often supported by the utility master plan. We've done a number of other documents over the last couple of years, condition assessments of the building, structural assessments of the lift stations, and we just finished a 2018 condition assessment again of a number of key infrastructure within the water and wastewater systems as well. So all of those help feed what the capital plan should be. And then, like I said, it's a process where we determine, you know, what's reasonable for us to go forward, what can we delay. We have a lot of those discussions to make sure that we bring forward projects that truly need to be completed in the next short-term period. All the other ones do have placeholders in the utility rate model because it's a 20-year plan, so everything is captured in there, and there's opportunity to play with the year that we actually deliver the projects. The other thing that does play into here is we sit down with engineering and we understand when they're going to deliver their surface road work so that we can also piggyback on those and put in any deep utility work that's been identified in the UMP or that's been an operational concern for EPCOR. For example, like a valve's not working. Yes, Lisa?
One thing that is commonly understood is that the utility, because there are other departments within the town that support the utility, so the utility does transfer some funds, just because you just mentioned engineering, but both to our finance department and our engineering department, right?
And Public Works Administration. And it's over $400,000 a year that we transfer to tax-supported departments.
You also mentioned EPCOR, so I imagine that there's some collaboration that happens during this process of assessment of our existing infrastructure that you do with EPCOR.
Yes, they lead all of the master plans and the condition assessment reports. So they'll work with the various consultants that we hire to do that thorough review. And then based on that, they submit a plan that they feel is appropriate. And then we review that with engineering support and say, yes, we accept this one to stay here, but you know what, we need to move this one out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and there's the growth assumptions as well. So, you know, as development continues, we add more kilometer of pipe, more services accounts, and all of that is factored in as well. So it's an extra revenue, but it's also an extra expense to EPCOR, and we make adjustments for that in our contract with them. And then, like I said, we want to make sure that we complete the process to the AWW ratios, fixed rates. And like I said, 2019 will be the last year to do that. And then after we throw all of those in, and essentially those are all expenses, then we decide, okay, how much money do we need to A, ensure that we can fund all of that, and B, the other factor for us is ensuring that we have an adequate reserve balance out in year 5. And in this year, we're proposing a reserve balance that will be around the $9 million mark, which we're quite pleased with because what that allows us to do is fund a lot of these projects from reserves and not have to take debt on. So then we figure out the revenue, and then what it does, we got this little Control Z. Rick and I like to call it the ta-da, and bang, it does its thing. I always like to see a computer smoke. And it spits out what the rate should be and the ratio. So it's pretty cool to see if you like Excel sheets humming. So with that, here's what our historical expenses and revenues have been. The expenses are on the right-hand side here, the orange, yellow, and green, broken out by contributions to reserve. Our financing costs in yellow, and then our operational costs. You can see that's the bulk of our expense. And then on the blue and the white is our revenue side. And you can see they always need to equal each other, and what we often use is the transfer to reserve to ensure that we zero the budget. For those who recall, there was a time where the development industry was subsidizing the utility rates. So when development really fell off in 2007, 2008, we were at a shortfall, and so this white was a transfer of taxes. So we've paid all of that back now, and here we are, I believe, in a really healthy financial position for the utility, where with the number of corrections and rates, we are very self-sufficient. The last couple of years, we've been, the factor that we've had to increase the revenue by has been 5.5%. And that compounded benefit has allowed us to throttle back on that. And so for 2019 plus, we're looking more at 5% increase in revenue instead of 5.5%. And that's not a rate increase, that's just the revenue increase because we have growth and other things in there that you'll see. The other thing we wanted to do here, and why we utilize the rate model, is we want to make sure that we don't have huge fluctuations in rates for the ratepayers. So this allows us to make sure that we can keep it fairly moderate. So with our utility rate model, we put all of our expenses and understand what our revenues need to be. These are what we're proposing for rate increases in 2019 and 2020. So there's the 2018 column, what's currently approved by council. Here's the meter size on the left-hand side. So the proposed 19 rates and the percent change over 18. And again, the 2020 rates, because we'll be looking at a 2-year rate model, or rate approval, and then its percent increase over 2019. So I just wanted to highlight here, similar to what I've been talking about before regarding the commercial accounts. You can see here the 75 and the 100 mils, they have the most significant increase. And this will be their last time. Everyone else is fairly moderate. That's what the rate increase is on the water side. And then you can see that once we do make that final adjustment, everyone is the same increase, 3.5% across the board. And then the variable piece here, because we talked about this is the fixed, and the variable, again, applies to all the accounts regardless of the meter size. And that's at 3.9% and 4% in 2020. Similarly, oh, Lisa?
And I just looked ahead in your slides, I didn't see it, but, so you have a variable rate at 3.9% and a fixed rate increase. I'm just thinking of homeowners, mostly on 15 millimeter meter sizes. So do you know what that combined?
It's coming up.
It's coming up? Oh,
Yep.
It is. Okay.
Yep. You didn't go far enough.
Okay.
Okay, so similarly, there's the wastewater side. There's the 18 rates, the 19 rates. And you can see, again, fairly moderate increases, modest increases on all the meter sizes up to the 75 and the 100, the two larger ones that need to have that last adjustment in 19. And then you can see we're at a consistent 3.5% for all the rates across the board in 2020. So what does that mean? So here's the residential sector, and you can see it's a pretty straight line. No more significant jumps need to happen now that we've accommodated the AWW rates. So for 2019, when you combine the water and wastewater rates plus the variable, assuming that the average household uses 15 cubic meters of water, the rate increase or the impact to them is 2.9% or just shy of $16 a year is their impact on a residential account. And then similarly, it's 3.7% in 2020 or just over $21 a year, again, assuming that they are using average water use, 15 cubic meters per, yeah. Is that what you're looking for, Lisa?
Yes.
Yeah. And then on the commercial, it's really difficult to display that to council because there is no average well, there is an average, but it's so variable when it comes to the different types of businesses. And so some of them are significant water users, and you know, for them, the more water they use means the more money they're making. Because you know, if you think about a hotel using a lot of water or a restaurant using the water, it typically correlates to how busy they are and how many people are using their showers or how much dishes they need to clean. And it's just too difficult to display that. But what is important is in 2019, the increases when you combine the water and wastewater side can be somewhere between 2.3% and 10.3%. And the 10.3 is mostly related to those two larger accounts. Because you can see once we move into 2020, it's much closer together and much more reasonable at a max of 3.8% based on their average water use. So I threw this back in to help highlight that up to 2018 is what we have currently approved. 19 and 20 is what's being proposed. And you can see we're staying consistent with that line of what our rates or revenues have been over the last, I would say, at least 6 years since 2015 when we've been able to make those corrections. As I said, the previous years we've been increasing revenues by 5.5%, and for 19 and 20, and at least for the next 4 or 5 years beyond 2020, is sitting more at the 5% increase in revenue, which obviously if we need less revenue, then the rates are lower as well. So I talked a little bit about the incline block rate. So this only affects the residential sector. And as I said, we began in 2016. The last time we had data to present to council, we only were able to give partial of the year. Now we've got all of 2016, all of 2017, and almost all of 2018 to share today. So as I said, any residential account that exceeds 47 cubic meters over a 2-month period, any of the water that goes beyond that is charged a 20% surcharge to try to curb people's behavior and using less water, and because we find that financial incentives is likely the most effective way to get people to change their behavior. What this shows is in 2016, that extra amount of money that we got from the surcharge was about $31,000. In 2016, about $41,000 is the extra money that we made from it. And in 2018, we're currently sitting at $28,000. We'll probably be just over 30 when it's done. We only have one more billing cycle to get through. This table down here talks about how many accounts actually fall into that. So you can see, at least in, if we look at 2016 when we first began the project, 433 accounts out of 5,700 had one example of where they went beyond that. I don't know to what extent, but certainly went beyond that. And you can see how many actually went twice. And you can, these homes down here are ones that consistently go over, because we have 6 billing cycles a year, because we have 12 months. We do it every 2 months. And so we have about 101 Dalmatians here who need a lot of water. And you can see that hasn't changed much in 2017, 112. But this one has grown. So you can see that, you know, I think it did curb people but then that became almost commonplace. You know what? That's just the cost of running this house, perhaps. And I don't know for sure. That's my thoughts. And we are trending again to be high again here in 2018. Yes, Sally?
Just as somebody who's fallen into one of those categories,
Oh.
but I had an appliance that wasn't running properly, and I only knew to check because I work here and have seen this presentation. So because my bill, it's automatic payment, right? So some people don't read their bill. So I'm wondering if we've ever done outreach, especially to those multiple times, because I do think there are people who fall into that kind of category who may have a systematic problem in their home that they're not aware of, and they're not aware of this surcharge because the bill is on a monthly, it just is taken out of your account. So if we're not doing outreach, it may be that you're right, Andreas, that especially those one occurrences, people have made that decision. It may for other people be that they're just not aware, and I'm wondering if we've ever done an insert in a bill to try to do some education around that.
No, we have not done that formally. What we actually deal with is a significant spike, so that would be in the 1 to 2 times, where people have had a fixture break or a pipe break and or appliance break, and they've asked for some type of relief on their bill. But that's where it's at right now. Yeah.
And have we ever done any sort of study or something that would, I'm curious if the family or the houses that have multiple occurrences are simply large families or houses where there's just a whole lot of people living?
It's difficult to say. When we first introduced this, we did receive a few calls from people's, and it wasn't that they had a large family, it's that they just, they watered their trees. Existing established trees, especially during the dry months. The next slide will show when these occurrences happen in the time of the year, and you can see, and no surprise, it's during the summer months when people want to do more watering of their yard, and seems to be that's, for a lot of the cases, the reasons why they exceed is for watering their plants, their trees.
So presumably, there's a whole lot of families that are not exceeding, managing to live within that target. Majority.
The overwhelming majority. And I'll
Yeah,
just
you-
say, I think it's easy to assume that those are big houses or big consumers. And again, in my case, there was a humidifier attached to my furnace that had never worked properly since I moved in, but we didn't know. So, you know, we exceeded often until we were made aware and it was fixed. So I don't always think likely there are, anyway, I just think there could be any number of excuses.
Sure.
And if we don't reach out to people, you know, I mean, you're as a homeowner it was my responsibility, but, you know, I think there's any number of, it's really hard, I think is what Andreas is saying, is to understand what's happening where. Every circumstance could be different.
And you can see how many homes this represents. So on average, this is the number of homes here. So it's about, the average is about 200 a year, and you can see, I don't know why February is so high, but what we did expect is June, July, August, September, that's where we have most of our exceedances. But you can see here, if you average this is about 9 or 10% of the population that is exceeding. Yep.
Where does that money go in the budget?
It's just a sale of, right now it's a sale of service, or sale of utility, I think it's called. So it's no different than where the revenue goes for your regular utility bill. So they're charged a surcharge on the same format, and so when they pay for it, that's where all the money goes. We don't separate it out. We do track it separately, but we don't put it in a different GL.
I just wondered, when we're budgeting on our revenue, we do projections. Do we
Yeah.
project what we think this revenue is going to be, and it's part of that
We
budget?
haven't. We don't want to count on this, and it's not a lot of money. When we're talking a utility that's
Yeah.
in the $10 million range, $30,000, $40,000 is fairly minor and likely not beneficial to track or keep as a separate line item. The idea is that we want to eliminate that
Sure.
number. Yeah.
And to that, I was thinking, could that revenue then be used for public information, learning, that sort of thing?
Yeah, and I think that's a great suggestion.
Okay, thanks.
This isn't a question, it's just a commentary, and Andreas and I have both been around for a long time, so we saw the effect of when we first implemented meters.
Right.
And so the first few years that meters were implemented, the water usage was incredibly high, because people had never paid for water before.
Right.
So they used it without any reflection on it at all. And as soon as they started to pay for it by the cubic meter, we saw water consumption drop. Like, it was a precipitous drop over several years. But it's just interesting that potentially now people are likely just accepting it as, you know, I have to pay for water or whatever. And then there's potentially a complacency. We talk about, you know, price being a real motivator. Is it a motivator at the gas pump to not to fill your car or not to drive? You know, you just sort of accept, geez, gas is at $1.25 now or whatever, right? And it's just a commentary, but certainly,
Well,
I don't know
we need
what's happening.
a certain minimum amount, as I understand it. So if we really conserved water, if we really got on it, we'd have to charge more for water, wouldn't we?
well,
Like, that's sort of the
yeah,
paradox.
that is the paradox.
I know.
You're right.
Sorry.
You're right. It's yeah, we're selling a commodity that we really don't want people to use.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
it's a difficult kind of, yeah, paradox is a good word.
On our water bills, are people aware that they're actually paying a higher rate for some of their water if they're in the incline block rate?
Yes, it's
So
broken
there-
out so they can see it.
So there's a line
to-
item that says
yeah.
base rate.
But to Sally's point, some people may not look at their bill in great detail and not pick up on that. It's clear, yeah.
Yeah, okay, so there is some recognition that you're triggering the incline block rate on yours.
Correct.
On your bill,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, and as I said, this really just applies to the variable rate, and like I said, the residential sector only. It's difficult to do on the commercial side, so This would be the 2018 rate. Here's the 2019 rate, and these are, so once you exceed 23.6 cubic meters, this is the 20% surcharge, $1.24 or $1.02 versus 85 cents.
So does that, do these surcharges apply to all size lines or only the smaller residential lines?
Just the residential, the 15 mil. Yeah.
So I was just thinking about my own situation, and our water is supplied through the condominium, so that would be a bigger line, likely.
Yes, bigger line. So you wouldn't be
So I
included
can
in
go
this.
crazy with my shower, 15, 20 minutes twice a day. Another benefit of living in a condo. Yeah.
And then the last thing that is valuable to us is this graph that shows our reserve balance over our reserve target. So this red line is our reserve target that we have set, that we've looked to do increases over the years with value of money goes up. And the blue line is what our reserve balance is, and you can see that it does go quite high here at the end. I think what's more important is at least the next 10-year snapshot to 2029, and you can see that we're slightly above the reserve balance, which is an appropriate position to be in to deal with perhaps some unplanned projects. We do have from time to time in the utility needed to come back to council for a few extra dollars. So it gives us that buffer for when those circumstances and the market dictates that we do need a few extra dollars to allow a project to continue going forward. You can see here we are very much mirroring the target, and like I said, by year 5 or 2023, we are just slightly over the $9 million mark, and the target is sitting at about $8 million. So it's a good position to be in. It's a position we're in every year when we bring a proposed budget to council.
And just to be clear, the graph always looks like this. So we never actually get to the point where the two lines diverge, because we do the adjustment each budget cycle, we look at the rates, and we look at the actual costs and expenses. So the graph always looks like this. We never actually get there. No should. No should. That's right. Yeah, and the intent is not to.
Okay, so I'm going to just go into the, actually maybe I can ask what would be the best for the group. I can go into the utility model right now before we get into the specific capital projects, or do it after the capital projects.
You're on a roll.
I'm on a roll. Okay. So we'll keep going. Summary for just 2019 and 2020, we're looking at 13 projects in 19 for $4.5 million, 6 projects in 2020 for close to 8. 6.1 or almost $6.2 million is coming from reserve, which, like I said, we're very pleased with. And then half or 50% of the projects are funded from debenture. And those ones are mostly to do with growth-related projects that are funded or paid for back by the development industry because they're growth required. Oh, sorry, no. Those are ones that are large projects. Sorry, this is $4.6 million is coming from developers.
So the funding doesn't add up to the expenses. So 13 projects and 6 projects, that's 8 and 4, that's about $12.5 million.
Yeah.
But funded from reserve and funded from debenture is about the same. So the offset levy funding,
It would be in here. Yeah.
so that's right.
That's right. Yeah. We just wanted to demonstrate how much is being funded from growth.
Right. So it's not directly from
That's
offset levy. That levy is funding the other
Yes.
pools.
Yes. So that's a little confusing. And here's a summary of the projects. You can see some of them are multiple years. The orange ones are the wastewater related. Brown just wouldn't show up behind the black. And come on. And the blue are the water related projects. You can see the bulk of our expenses are not only in the operating but on the capital side are around the wastewater section of the utility, so that 32-68% split. And you can see here, so these are the values of the projects. Some of these projects actually go beyond 2020. For example, the Baffin Headworks continues on for 4 years, and you can see which ones are related to growth and which ones are related to life cycle. So these ones, the assets have come or will be coming to the end of their useful life, and so we're looking to replace those. And then the growth-related ones, so to accommodate, or to allow it to accommodate more units to come online, we need to do these expansions of our existing facilities. I'll go into a little bit more detail for each of these projects in the next couple of slides. The one I won't go into is this vehicle replacement, this cube vans slated for 2019. And unless there's any questions, I'll move into the next slides, because that vehicle supports both sides of the utility. So when we look at the capital projects, we really break it out into 4 different categories. There's the wastewater treatment, there's water treatment, there's the collection system. So when you flush your toilet, it's collected in the pipes and brought to the wastewater treatment plant through lift stations. And then on the water side, when on the water treatment, from there it's distributed out to the network of homes. So that's the 4th category. So there's wastewater treatment, water treatment, collection, and distribution. We've broken the capital projects out into those categories. So the first one is the wastewater treatment plant. These are 4 projects. Some of them are single year, some of them are multiple year, that were identified by EPCOR when we completed a 2018 condition assessment of the wastewater treatment plant. The wastewater treatment plant was commissioned in 1996, so we're now going into year 23 for that facility. A lot of the equipment in there is original, and it's a fairly corrosive environment, and there's a lot of equipment that EPCOR and the consultant that did the condition assessment has identified that do require replacement in the next couple of years. So here's a schematic of the wastewater treatment plant. It's a little bit different than the handout you have, but you can see here these are the different projects we have. So the intermediate piping, here's a wet well that goes between the seaside and the end side. Those are those big cells that council may remember when we did the tour. There's a pump that brings them back and forth. And so those, like I said, are original. They're coming to the end of life. Our MCCs down at the front of the plant, we have 3 of them. Again, they're original. The equipment right now is antiquated. The manufacturer no longer supports that equipment, and so we're in a very difficult position if any of those were to go down. Those are the ones that fire up any of the electrical motors that we have, pumps. So those are very key infrastructure. And so we're looking to replace those with something that will be supported by manufacturers. The clarifiers are sorry.
I just had a question about, so the effluent discharge, we had a problem this last little while, or EPCOR did, with readings that Alberta Environment asked us to do. And now they seem to have solved the problem. It was a pretty brutal year. So some of these repairs would be related to keeping our regulatory obligations, wouldn't they?
Yes, all of them would be. If any of these failed, we would essentially have a release, and that would be a violation of our approval to operate. So. And
then other jurisdictions are, like I think Longueuil just authorized discharge of sewage into the river. Other jurisdictions don't seem to be as circumspect as we are, I think.
Yeah, I would say municipalities across the country are somewhat, there's no consistent discharge quality requirements that they have. We have fairly stringent one because the Bow River is a very sensitive river, which is where we discharge to, and so we have fairly high requirements that we need to meet.
Okay.
Yeah. The clarifiers, if you recall, when you're standing out on the deck, you've got those 2 open tanks where we can see a lot of the fats, oils, and greases. And so, again, that's original. So there's a skimmer that pulls the grease off, and it's on a chain belt. And we're looking to replace those over the next couple of years. And so there's, like I said, all of this stuff is existing equipment. It's coming to end of life, and we need to replace those. No questions on that? So that's the wastewater treatment plant. Then we get into the collection part. So I&I is inflow and infiltration. This is a capital project we've been doing for several years, where we go in and camera all of the wastewater pipes under the road to see what their condition is, see where there are leaks. These are pipes that don't have material in them all the time, so there's always capacity in these pipes. You obviously want capacity. When you flush, you want to make sure there's a place for it to go. In the down valley bottom, these pipes are often submerged in groundwater when the groundwater is high. So because there's capacity in the pipes, and if there happens to be a crack in the pipe, we do have groundwater flowing in, and we wanted to make sure that we weren't treating groundwater at the wastewater treatment plant. So this program was intended to go out, deal with that. Manholes, which is another place where water can enter into the sanitary system. And so it's basically going out, flushing the pipe, making sure it's clean so they can see the exterior or interior walls. We run a camera through, and we can identify areas that need to be replaced at some point. So sometimes they're bad enough, we need to go in and do it now. Sometimes we can delay and combine it with a engineering project to do some road resurface. We've been doing this for a number of years. We have done all of the valley bottom. And the last couple of years, we've actually moved into Cougar Creek because we were concerned about what the condition of the pipes after the 2013 flood. We've done all of that work. There's a number of projects that have been identified. So this program is essentially coming to a close for now because we've addressed all the work that we need to at this point going into 2019. So you won't see this capital project after 2020. At some point, we will bring it back. And we don't know if we're going to do it specifically as a capital project or just combine it with rehab because it is a rehabilitation of an existing asset.
So Andreas, because I know the I&I situation that you were just describing causes flows at the wastewater treatment plant to go way up, typically in June and July or when the groundwater is high. So are we seeing a reduction in flow at the wastewater treatment plant?
We are. We're, especially in June when the groundwater is at its highest, we have seen a reduction in wastewater, and it's really hard to tell because we don't, because things have, we've sold more water.
Right. But there's also a strength of the wastewater coming in. It was very dilute because it was quite a bit of clean water coming in from the groundwater, and so is that improving? Yes, but it's funny because EPCOR has commented that they appreciated having more water coming through because it was easier to clean, and now the stuff that's coming in is much stronger and more difficult to treat. Yeah, so the investment that we've made both in looking at the condition and doing the repairs has certainly paid off on because the other thing is with the amount of water coming through, one of the biggest expenses the wastewater treatment plant is around power and pumping this water through the plant. And so with less water going in that's stronger, we're doing less pumping. So we've really seen our electrical bills level off for the wastewater treatment plant.
Although what's interesting to note, those are all positive benefits. You remember last Christmas, we had this problem with the TAN, the total ammonium nitrate. And one of the causes that they identified for that was the fact that, as Andreas points out, there is less water in the material that is coming in now. And so the combination of low flush toilets, the work we've done on the I&I, all these different things mean what's coming through is much more concentrated and was having an impact. So there is, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point EPCOR starts to request to be able to put some more water back into the system in order to dilute it somewhat to make it easier to treat.
I look forward to that request. Okay, next four around collection, I have separate slides for. So this is Lift Station 6. We've completed the redesign. This is one of our oldest lift stations in town. Actually, I think it's our second oldest lift station. Yeah. 1980, Lift Station 6 was constructed. The RCMP building is just right up here, and so these pipes coming down is the gravity that comes from all the homes in that side of Cougar Creek, and they go into lift station 6, and then it's forced back up Elk Run Boulevard to a gravity that will bring it over to the wastewater treatment plant. Like I said, it's a 1980s facility. When we did the condition assessment, it was very corroded environment, and so it was recommended for replacement. Council agreed to do the design work in 2018, so this is the next step to complete the work in 2019.
What's the intake coming in from the west? The bottom arrow there, right? So there's an arrow coming in from the left to the right? That one?
Oh, that's from Boulder Crescent area,
Okay.
because it all
Just comes
goes down, yeah, and then pumped back into lift station 6, where there it's pumped up the hill, up Elk Run to Glacier Drive and across. The next one is along Bow Valley Trail. So here is the intersection. So here's A and W for reference, and lift station 2 is just off the screen here on the right-hand side. So when we had done our last UMP, this was identified by the consultant that would need to be upgraded, upsized to deal with capacity. So this is a growth-related project, and this is our peak wet water flow. So when we have a lot of people flushing and we have infiltration, we need to accommodate a system for those significant days. And so we need to increase our liter per second capacity. And what they're recommending is going from these pipes at 350 millimeter to 450. And this is coinciding with engineering project to resurface along the side of the road here. The pipe is actually not in the road itself, it's just in the shoulder, so it shouldn't have an impact on traffic.
There will be an impact on traffic, as there will be a construction zone and vehicles will be required to slow down to a 30km/h speed for a construction zone, as part of other similar such projects.
All right, less impact. The next one, this is a project this is a $200,000 project to look at design work for Railway Avenue. Here the pipes are actually in the roadway, and I know this is a project that engineering is working on from the surface side to determine what the streetscape is going to look like and how it's going to be phased. That process is going on. In parallel, we're doing a study to take a look at this recommendation by the UMP to upsize these pipes to up to 300 millimeters in sections and up to 450 in sections at the same time. So we're looking to do this in 2020, but we feel there's some work that needs to be done to understand how we approach this project. And you can see here, this is railway, there's this elevation place. The next slide will show that a little bit better. Here's Railway Avenue. And you can see that the consultant has identified upsizing a number of sections of pipe up to this point. One of the ideas that it's been floated around is if we went a little bit deeper, the same size but a little bit deeper, and continued that grade all the way up to here, there would be an opportunity to remove lift station 3, which is our oldest lift station, 1976, offline. Basically take it, decommission it, and lift station 5, which is our third oldest lift station, just at the entrance to Larch here. We'd be able to take both of those offline and do a full gravity system all the way down to lift station 2. Right now, they need to be pumped to get enough velocity to get to the lift station. So one of the challenges with this is this area in particular has extremely high groundwater and makes for construction below surfaces very difficult to do. So this study that we're going to look at next year is, can we do this? Can we take this idea and make it work? Is it constructible without too many disruptions? Are there too many risks associated with it right now? We're learning lots right now with the construction of lift station 2. That the groundwater is so significant that, do we want to just deal with it here because this is a priority lift station, and do we want to continue with that risk and headache as we go farther north? or bring the pipe up to where its current location, current height is, and then continue that through here and leaving lift station 3 and lift station 5 online and replacing it when it does require replacement at some point in the future. So that's the analysis we want to do. The other part that plays a factor in this is you can see this line here, which was also identified in the UMP. This is Fairholme, and then it cuts across here. This is 7th Avenue, going all the way down just to the pond and then going in behind Mallard Alley. That pipe was identified to be under capacity right now. So the other thing we're going to balance is if we don't make the pipe bigger and deeper, we will actually have to go ahead and replace this at some point. If we can make it bigger or deeper, then we don't need to do this.
So where are those connected?
It's right here, because these actually go, this whole area here is the, goes into lift station 5. Yeah.
Sorry, it's just not connected.
Sure, yeah. What I've got here is the sections of pipe identified in the UMP, not the whole section that goes to the lift station 5. So if we take lift station 5 off, this, we don't have to take all of this material from here to lift station 5 and pump it down. This will all just feed this way, and there'll be lots of capacity to do it.
So then it would flow the other way, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it would go this way.
But on the darker orange line as well?
Only the stuff that's right off of it. So the stuff that's going to the lift station 5 right now would actually go this way down 17th Street.
Right.
Yep.
But that orange line that starts near Mallard Alley, where does it go now?
Yeah.
Okay, so that goes down.
And we've done upgrades to lift station 1. It has the capacity to deal with that. So that's just some of the other parts that will, and so as we go through that, we'll share those results with council, because at some point we're going to have to make a decision on how we best move forward with Railway Avenue. Yes?
So Andres, you mentioned lift station 2 in that project, and I know some of us saw the pipe
Geyser?
Geyser that was hit a few weeks ago, but I'm just wondering, because there was quite a bit of concern about getting that project done outside of the high water time frame, and just wondering how it's going, because it was a pretty important project, I know.
Yeah, we are, it's in different phases, and actually you can see it here. So this is where the new lift station is going. The pipe that it's tying into is right here. Where we hit the water line, that was something, as I think I mentioned in the committee of the whole report, is something that they had anticipated as a potential risk. So they had a plan in place. So it only took them an hour or so to bring the geyser under control. And that was where they were putting the wet well in the ground. Where the big risk is, and that's coming next, is where they tie the wet well into the force main. And we're going to try to, we're continuing to monitor the groundwater levels so that we get it at the lowest point. And we have a dewatering plan. One of the ideas we're looking at is, because it's just pure groundwater, is we're working with the province to see if we have the ability to dewater straight into the creek. So we're still evaluating options to deal with the dewatering, because there is, and so as we get closer to that, we'll have more information about what's the best approach, what's going to be the least amount of risk, and making sure we do it at the most appropriate time. But on that, you can see there's another capital project for about $330,000 to do a connection between the lift station and the first manhole. So this is this section of red pipe. This was, like I said, this project here, from the lift station all the way up to up Railway Avenue, is a 2020 project. We have the contractor on site right now. Dewatering, as we just talked about, is a really big front and center issue that we're trying to make sure we can head off and manage. And so this was identified as a 2019 project that we could go ahead with, to go from the lift station at least to the first manhole, because that's going to be quite deep, while we have the thinking and the processes around managing groundwater. So that's why we want to do it right away, because this is, in addition to lift station 2 being high risk, this next section of pipe between the lift station and the first manhole is also very high risk, and there's an opportunity to do that. And no matter which way we go here, we still will need to do this project at some point. So that's what that's for. It was just something that we had forgotten, and we just wanted to move it into 2019, not wait till 2020, because we have that expertise and that equipment already on site. So now moving on to water treatment, the only project that's identified is a Pump House 2 a treatment capacity upgrade in it's really just to do the design work, and it's to increase our max day demand to 225 liters per second, and really what we're talking about is adding more filters and new UV disinfection. So we may use what we have there right now and expand the building, or get a different type of disinfection system. And yeah, the third piece is to upgrade the intake from the forebay to the plant as well. Yes.
I just have a question about that. The maximum daily, MDD stands for?
Max day demand.
Day demand?
Yeah.
What is the current max day demand?
I think it's 203 liters per second.
203?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Again, this project would be required to allow to produce more water and to provide water. Any expansions to wastewater side, water treatment side, is going to be at Pump House 2 and not Pump House 1. This is the one that would service us out into Three Sisters.
So, and just looking at your 5 or 6 year capital projection, this project is just design,
Yeah.
but in 2 years' time, you have an $8 million project for the construction.
Correct.
Adding more filters, so expanding the footprint of the building there?
Possibly, or we may have to go up. Yeah, we don't have a lot of space there. We really learned that when we added the clear well last year. So the footprint, we may have to use the existing footprint and maybe going up another story. Yeah. There's some unknowns that we'll be able to determine when we go through the design phase. Yeah. Okay.
There's a funding change in this project as well. So when you get your final packages, page 12, line 242, the $455,000 debenture has been changed to water reserve. And we're going to add the debenture on when we do the $8 million project in 2 years. Normally we wouldn't take debt on a design. If for some reason the project didn't go through, it would be debt on a plan, so it wouldn't make sense. So we added on the bigger construction project and pay the reserve back in 2 years. So Andres made that change about a week ago. So that would be
So the sheet shows 345 under reserve and 455. What should that be?
So the 345 would be still coming out of off-site levies. So if you go to page 242, 345 would still be off-site levy, and 455 would be water reserve.
So that line
Both, they would both be out of reserve. That's right. That's right. 800 out of reserve. And then just below that, the construction project, the 7.6 million in debenture would actually be 8,135, and then the reserve part would be a credit of 195 because we would pay that money back.
And that's in the model. As Brick said, we made that change last week. Yeah. So the rates are, recognize that. All right. So then the last one is water distribution. So this is a project that's been on the books for a number of years. We've done design this year. So there's actually two parts to this project. We're asking for an additional $50,000 to do a little bit more design work. We've run into a few challenges with this project. So we just need some additional dollars to work through those details. And then we have the capital project for $4.2 million to follow. Where the challenges have been is around this pipe here. So when we built Lift Station 8, which is located here, we ran a pipe across for lift station 8 for the wastewater to come across to the wastewater treatment plant. At the same time, we added in another pipe in there that we capped at both ends, knowing that at some point we'll need to run a water main across there as well. In the 2013 flood, that pipe has become exposed at this corner over here. And so we're quite concerned about that because every day there's gravel and water rushing over the top of the surface of that pipe, and we're not sure if the pipe is going to be serviceable. So we're quite concerned that we may not be able to do that, and we may have to run a separate new pipe across doing some drilling, micro-tunneling across underneath the river. So those are things we need to evaluate. The other thing, we haven't been able to expose the pipe at this end right now because this is the Tipple Mine site that has some contaminated soils from the original mining operations. We are being required that every time, when we go down to find the end of the pipe that we put in, the soil that we take out, we're confident will be contaminated, and we're not allowed to put that soil back. We actually have to put new soil that's not contaminated, clean soil, back in its place. And so those two things are a factor when we're looking at how we're going to construct this, and that's what we need that extra $50,000 for. Everything else, no concerns with in terms of the alignment along the access road and across the Tipple Mine site here. We're going to be coming actually more, the alignment will be more along this road here and then hooking up closer here, so a shorter alignment.
Just a reminder, this was the project, was it not, Mike, that we brought to council around the EIS and the third-party review, right? Yeah.
So we are doing EIS on this project.
Yes.
It is extremely complex, and there are a lot of factors.
There's a river crossing, you're going through the habitat patch there, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, on both sides, it's a complicated project. So this $50,000 will give us better information, and then we'll understand how we're going to proceed with the project. Next one, along Bow Valley Trail, again, this is, here's A and W intersection. So we've got a water line that comes across here and then along. So at the same time we do the wastewater upgrade, we're going to replace the water line up here as well so that we can hit 300 liters per second, which is our requirement for the commercial sector for fire flows. And it goes right up to the entrance to Hospital Place. So we'll be doing both projects at the same time. And again, that's just in the ditch here, and so we'll have some minor traffic implications.
I have a question about that one. Excuse me. So that's a fire flow upgrade. Is that a change to that requirement, that we have to have a certain amount of water available for fire? Has it always been the same?
No, there's no change. It's just something that we noticed when we did modeling that we weren't meeting. And so that's what we need to do, is increase the pipe size to make sure we have that. There are a few other locations in town that, you know, they're close, but they're not the 300, which is what we have in our engineering design guidelines, and we have projects to get those to standard over a period of time.
Okay, thanks.
And then in summary, as I said, different than years past, we didn't need to increase the utility revenue by 5%. We did, or by 5.5%, we did 5% to meet all of our requirements, and including transferring a healthy reserve, transfer to reserve to pay for capital projects. 2019, we're going to be the last year for the AWA, so you won't hear me talk about that again. Hallelujah. And the reserve balance will be over $9 million in 2023, and these are the impacts on the residential and the commercial sector. So again, 2.9%, or just about $16 for the whole year based on average consumption for 2019, and just over $21 or 3.7% for 2020, and there's the range around the commercial sector. And like I said, this 10.3 is really around those two larger accounts. And then in the future, 2020 plus, they're going to be more reasonable and be consistent with all the other accounts.
Okay, I think this is a great time, before we get into solid waste services, to take a break, but just, are there any final questions on, whether or not to look at the model, I guess, sorry. We should just look at the model. Everything that Andreas has been talking about gets fed into a fairly sophisticated multi-spreadsheet model.
Is that hard to read?
Yes.
So, and interestingly enough, we do have a project to replace this model because this is a spreadsheet, it's an Excel-based, it's dependent on one person who's the architect of this particular.
That's the offsite levy.
That's the offsite, Mike. Yeah, this one I believe is going to stay.
It's not as complicated.
Wasn't it the same architect?
It is. It was, yeah. Okay. So here's the model. You can see it's taken us 8 versions to get to something that we feel comfortable proposing to council. As I said earlier in the presentation, what we do is, we look, for example, at the capital side. So what you see here are all the capital projects that we've identified in the 6-year capital plan, broken out by the various funding sources. So, for example, you can see that we look at and there's only 4 different types. It's utility reserve, utility debt, and then it's offsite reserve or offsite debt. Unless there's a grant in there. And so those are the different funding sources based on system. We also recognize when a project is eligible for offsite, so we can make sure that we put either all or a portion of that project in the offsite levy model and capture those fees back from connection fees the developers would pay. Here's the project numbers, that internal numbers that we use. So there's the list of the projects. There's the different projects, and you can see that we go out 20 years. All of these projects are identified in the UMPs and other condition assessment reports that we've done. They really only go, pardon me?
Utility master plan.
Sorry, what did I say?
UMP.
Oh, yeah. And then what we also do is outside of the 5-year is we recognize that there are a number of other projects that we're just not aware of at this point, but we want to make sure that we put a placeholder in there for those projects so that we have adequate rates to support those projects when they do come in. So we do have unplanned projects that we include in there around deep utility replacement and other life cycle work as well that, like I said, we just don't know yet that we expect. And some of this could be around regulatory. In 2019, our approval to operate.
So you're just arbitrarily budgeting like $2 million in 2024 for an unknown budget.
Correct.
Just to kind of keep that future looking reasonable.
Exactly, and we've been doing this for years, and in some cases it's been prudent because then we have those funds there for those unknowns or those projects that have come in much greater expense than we had projected. Yeah, so some of the other pressures on the capital project program is around regulatory. As I said, we have a new, we'll be negotiating a new approval to operate for the water and wastewater side, and that's really the province's time to give us a heads up that they're going to be wanting more stringent requirements. And so that is the time where we have to identify some projects. The big one that's always been at risk is to do more phosphorus removal. And so we have that project identified in the 10-year for if that was ever to occur. But the last go around, the province didn't need that. They felt that where we're at was adequate. And so hopefully we can stay there.
So when does our license expire?
2019.
2019.
Yeah. So at that point, we'll understand if there's any regulatory changes that we need. Like I said, the Bow River is a fairly sensitive body of water. We're not the only ones discharging there. Other communities downstream actually use that as their water source, so we need to make sure that our impact on it is as minimal as possible, and the province has our approval to operate to make sure that we continue to be like that. So then you can see as we identify the different funding sources, that's identified here. So in 2019, we have a draw of from our utility reserve and our offsite levy reserve. So these are funds that we have already in the bank, monies that we've already collected that finance records. that we can utilize and not have to draw from the utility reserve. And then we get into, and that's on the water side, and then we can get into the wastewater side, and you can see how much debt we need to take that are identified here. When we do take debt, it automatically shows up in this spreadsheet, and so we make a determination, is it a 5, 10, or 25-year payback period, what our interest rates, what we estimate our interest rates are going to be. We believe we're fairly conservative, our numbers here, so that, again, our rates are appropriate. And we do that for the water side and the wastewater side, as you can see here. And we do it for off-site and non-off-site. So it's a fairly complex project. There's nothing that scares me more than when I see the word reference show up everywhere.
See the word what?
Reference, REF, you know, when you make a...
The hashtags.
A circular.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So we got none of those here, which is great. And so, yeah, the capital plan, either funding from reserve or debt. The debt financing costs are established in these two tabs. And then the next piece we look at is the expenses. And like I said, we've broken the utility out from a water and the wastewater side. So if we look at just the water side, you can see here, this is the cost from EPCOR, specifically on the water side. We break it out there as well, so we apply the right expenses to the right budget. And so here's the expense here for 2019. On the water side, the rehab expense, and then any infrastructure growth. We anticipate growth each year. New accounts, new sections of pipe are added by the development industry. And then a number of out-of-scope projects are all identified here as well, including our environmental performance plan, which was identified in our last approval to operate, which is where we submit an annual report each year specifically about our environmental performance. And it's not just necessarily around discharging water into the Bow River, but it's how we do storm management, for example. Any water conservation efforts that we do. We identify all of those in there. And so that's an extra cost to us. And you can see another project here, leak detection and repair. It's another project we do, and this one we're not going to stop. We don't want, because these pipes are pressurized, when there is a crack, we actually put potable water into the ground. So we want to make sure that we don't do that, and we capture a lot of that. And so we invest about $65,000 a year in going out with headphones, hooking up to water valves, and shutting them off. And then if we can hear anything, then we know there's a leak between these two valves. And then we'll go in, depending on how significant it is, we'll go in and do a repair. And then on the water side, you can see that here. Those are a lot of our similar. This would be that 68% of EPCOR's contract is applied here. So then again, we identify all of our expenses, similar to, per what Lisa was talking about earlier, and our contributions to the tax-supported departments. Here is what we are contributing in 2019 which is about $443,000 is contributed to both engineering, finance, and public works administration for them to the support that they provide to the utility on an annual basis. So then once we do that, we have all of our expenses, we have all of our capital projects in there and all the terms and so on. Then we get into the revenue side, and this is where things get exciting. So you can see here, we've landed on a 5% increase in revenue to support the utility. Now, this is where we do the ta-da. If what I'm going to show you next is, and we'll come back to this, is here's the water and wastewater summary, and then both of them are combined here. So these are all the revenues, all the expenses, what are transferred to reserve so that we zero the budget, and what are reserve balance, the ins and outs, contributions, etc. And so you can see our target. And what we end up with is this table that I showed you in the original, in that presentation, about the health of the utility in terms of the target relative to the reserve balance that we have. And what we're going to come back to this because this is where you're going to see the best visual explanation on how the utility rate model works. So for example, let's say I decided that we needed, council said, hey, we can't afford to go greater than 0% on the utility side. So what would that look like? We can do that. And what you'll see down here is these things over here, these revenue targets don't add up. They should all be zeros. We do this, and this is where it smokes. And you can see now that they're all zeros. So that means those ratios, that 53, 47% between fixed and variable, the water and wastewater is all factored in there. And then we end up, what it's really trying to calculate is what is the rate for 2019 for the 15 millimeter service. And then what it does, you can see the number up there is, I don't know, like 50 decimal places. But what it does is the next one multiplies it by 1.5. And the next one's multiplied by 2.5 and 5, and so we get that ratio. So what this this macro really does is it determines what does our residential rate need to be, and then it goes and calculates all of our other rates based on that, which would be a very difficult thing to do that manually, probably impossible. So this macro is really valuable that it does that. So we've done a 0% increase in rates. So when we go back to the summary table, you can see what the impact is. We're below the target, we go over top, and then we just plummet after that. And that's just doing a 1 year at 0%. So if we did 1% across the board, which we can show you, we can see what that looks like. So right now, or let's look at 2%. And we spread that over the 20 years. And you can see that rate has stayed the same, but it's obviously going to change. Yeah, it's obviously going to change. And this lets you know, this little spot right here lets you know that these need to be zero. They're not the right split. So we do our ta-da. Those will all change to zeros. And you can see we've gone from 1676 to 1709 with a 2% increase in the rate, or 2% increase in the revenue. And then when we go back to here, because remember that when I did it the first time, I just did the 1 year to 0 and the rest were still 5. This one is a consistent 2% across the board. We'll survive for a little bit, and then things really tank. So obviously not appropriate for managing the utility. Is there another scenario that a councillor is curious to see what it would look like?
We should see the ta-da once more.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's a scary line. So that's the review of the utility rate model, and maybe that's a point that you want to pause, Lisa?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point, time to pause and take a quick break. We do still have the full solid waste services. It's not as complex as the utilities, although we do want to talk about organics. So how about we come back at 1:45, 7 minutes?
Okay.
Rick, can I ask Okay, I'll call our Finance Committee meeting back to order, please. And we'll get started with Andreas Como and Solid Waste Services review. Thanks. Take it away, Andreas.
Okay, solid waste services, yes, it'll be a shorter presentation, similar to the utility rate model. There's a number of inputs we need to put out there. Again, in 2016, it was decided to split the two into two self-supporting utilities, which actually will come up here. We're noticing we're spending a lot more on the recycling side than on the waste side. So then we put in our operating expenses, come up with the capital plan, the funding options. We do make some assumptions on growth, and then that determines our, we play around with this. This one actually doesn't have the TDA, because we don't have that ratio piece, but it, we do have to play around with what the revenue rates need to be in order to support the utility, and making sure that we have an adequate reserve balance for future projects. So once all that work is done, and again, it's similar to the utility rate model, we have, these are what the proposed rates are. Different than the years in the past, we'll be coming to council for a 3-year amendment to the rate bylaw. Normally we've done a 2-year, which mirrors the operating budget. But because of the discussions around organics and when we implement it and wanting to make sure that we don't have a significant spike in rates in 1 year and we smooth it out over 2 years, we're looking to propose a 3-year rate amendment. So for the waste collection side, and again, it's because the recycling is costing us more and that's where most of our expenses are, you can see that we are sitting at the rate staying at the same place over 4 years. And so for the next 3 years, no increases in rates on the recycling, on the waste side, but more on the recycling side. So then we go into the recycling residential. This is what the current rate is. This is what the increase is. This one is largely to do with that new employee that we have in there to deal with contamination levels and growth. And so that's largely what that is. And then when we move into 2020, 2021, that's where we are looking at a 2-year 8% increase in rates, which is to support the organics program, diversion program.
Is this a bi-monthly or monthly rate you're showing?
This one?
Yeah. No.
This is a monthly rate.
So that's the monthly rate, not the variance, right? We're looking at the actual.
This is what the rate will be. This is what the customer will see on their utility bill.
So
Yeah.
that's bi-monthly then?
That's monthly.
Monthly?
Yeah.
Okay.
But so when we get down to here, the change in 2019, when you combine 0% on waste and 11% on the recycling side, the combined difference is 4.6%, or $17.64 a year. Total for each customer. And because this is not a variable, this is really just a fixed rate, there is no fluctuation for the homeowner. This is the rate you'll be paying so that you can budget for it. And then similarly, once we look at introducing the organics program, and again a 0% and then an 8% on the recycling side, the total impact to the ratepayer is 3.6%, or a $14 increase in the rates. And then, like I said, we want to spread that over 2 years when we move into 2021. Because of that compounded benefit, it's only 3.3% increase on the recycling side, residential bill, and $13.50 is the total impact for the year to add an organics diversion program.
So to get the true cost organics diversion program, you have to add 14 and 13, basically.
Yeah, so it's about $28.
That's right.
Yeah. And then on the recycling on the commercial side. Oh. And then on the recycling side, we do get we are experiencing more cardboard and materials coming in from the commercial side, so there is a 4% increase in rates applied to the commercial sector.
I must have missed something. So how's this connect to the organic?
Well, these numbers here reflect, so the model it's gone through a number of iterations. The current model we have has organics diversion program embedded in the capital plan and the operational impacts. Once that's in there, and then we need to determine what the rates are to support that, the debenture payments and the operational expenses. This is what the model spits out for the rates. So what this is saying here is, in order to do the organics diversion program, we're going to need 8% increase in residential recycling rates over 2 years, with a total impact of $28 to each household per year.
So it costs each household $28 per year to add the collection program that is proposed in the budget.
And that's at the end of 2021, so that's 3 years from now.
Seems affordable.
We like to think so too.
Yes.
In isolation.
So remember, this is just the operating cost. This is just the operating cost. It does not reflect capital. And this is with the essentially limited project or program that we are rolling out, which is a series of 4 or 5 collection bins spread out throughout the community, as opposed to mirroring the recycling program. And it also reflects the fact that we would recover some on the commercial side from the commercial collection.
So if there wasn't the commercial collection kicking in as well, the numbers on residential will look different?
Yeah, the question is how much?
Yeah, and we can go through that. We have the model up here right now. We can remove, if we remove the commercial sector, if that's what you're asking, then we're not buying a $275,000 truck. We don't need to expand the building at this point. Those are 2 significant costs.
In the capital side.
In the capital side, yeah.
But on the operating side, you said you had the model right there and you could see the difference?
We could take those out.
The challenge on the operating side is that you still need the staff to be able to do the collection.
Sure, of course.
Right? So it's the savings on the operating side might be less than you might envision. The bigger savings would be on the capital side.
And so, just because it is complicated when it's all in a model. While it's true you're not looking at the capital, this is the operating, the impact of capital is in the operating model, right? So
That's
the
true.
cost of capital, the cost of
The debenture payments are
the
captured
debenture
in.
payments, et cetera, are captured in this as we move forward. So
So that 8%, the money that it generates, will capture the updated debenture payments, which are going to be greater than what they were before, and the annual operating costs, which includes fuel for the truck, the new operator, et cetera.
Can you remind me, when are we having the organics diversion start?
It'll be at some point in 2020.
And there's one
yes.
for commercial and one for residential? Like, they're not starting at the same time?
It's one program. It would start at about the same time.
For both sectors? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's how it's been worked up and presented to us.
Yeah, that's what I just
But
wasn't.
there's options, I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really is dictated by the time we can get the addition to the building commissioned.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because everything will be transferred through Canmore.
Okay.
So if we get the green light to go ahead, we'll be putting, there is a debenture that will need to be taken, so a borrowing bylaw will need to be completed. But we'll have all of the documents to go out to tender as that process is taking place, so that we can be ready to put that out to the public for bid in the end of third quarter.
Of
And then 2019, and then it's really just based on the submissions we get and the timelines that contractors and designers can meet.
Okay.
So, do you want to have a conversation now, today, about that, or is there another time scheduled for conversation?
yes, but I think there's
I have
probably some slides on the capital program. And
Yeah, I have all the expenses associated with that decision on another slide, and maybe Mayor Borman, that might be a good place to have that conversation.
Roger that.
Okay, so I'm not going to go through as much detail. The solid waste services model is a bit simpler. So similarly, here's that same graph we show where here is the target and where our current reserve balance is. And like we've discussed before, it obviously looks really crazy as you go farther out, but it always looks like this to deal with bumps in the road regarding costs and, you know, impacts with tariffs and the US dollar, et cetera. Because a lot of the stuff that we do is around metal, machinery that are influenced by those exterior or external international markets. And then we'll go into the capital projects. So here we've got 6 projects in 2019, close to $3 million. And then 1 project in 2020, $300,000. That's a replacement truck. There you can see about $900,000 from reserve, $1.4 million from debt. That's that borrowing bylaw we'll need to do to fund the organics diversion program, which also is funded from MSI, which is the $1 million in grant that you see there. So here's the slide I was talking about. When we look at the organic diversion program, what we've done at this point is we've put it, even though it's really one decision, we've got a number of other projects in there because they're all going to be done at the same time. So there's a roll-up of the total cost for the project. There is the piece that is applied for the bay expansion. Irrespective of going ahead with the organics diversion program, we will need to do in a change room expansion at $250,000. So if council decides not to go ahead with the program, administration would still really like to see this project go forward. The staff that are in there right now, and we're going to get a new one in 2019, it's very tight space in there right now. The other one that we can decide if it goes or not is adding the solar system to $200,000 to the balance of the roof line that's out there to complement the existing solar panels we put in last year. Like I said, this one is going to generate 100% of the building's power going forward. So we thought this would be a good investment, especially hedging where electrical costs or at least transmission costs may be going in the future. This collection vehicle is just around the commercial side, so it's a specialized vehicle, different than the ones we have right now. It's going to have a side, actually everything's going to dump into behind the cab. It's got a packer on it, and it's going to have a tipping arm on it. So everything on the commercial side is going to be collected through these plastic roll carts and located inside. And then here are the carts. This is a combination of the commercial carts as well as the small under sink containers that residents will have access to that are interested in participating in the program. And then this one here is the scaled down version of the residential pilot system that we discussed at the committee of the whole meeting, where we're just going to put out 5 containers, and this pays for the containers, the pads, and any type of enclosure that we need to put out there for $70,000.
What did you just mention, under the sink containers? What was that?
So normally when you have a residential commercial or a residential collection system, to make things easier for homeowners, the municipality will provide a little container like about this big, probably 2 liters, with a lid on it that homeowners can put underneath their sink, which is where they generate the organic waste, and then so they can just put it all in there, and then from there, the expectation is that's clean, just organic waste. When it's full, they walk it out to the bin, just dump the contents in there, clean it out, and start over.
So that's a capital cost. We just buy thousands of them and give them out?
Correct, yeah. Just to make things a little bit easier, the idea is, you know, as highlighted in the presentation at the Committee of the Whole, one of the biggest concerns we have is contamination, and so they're often used as a medium to provide promotion and education on there, so there'll be information on there about what can and cannot go in there, so hopefully people will use that as a reference. So it's really beneficial to provide that to homeowners.
Right. At the end of the day, our biggest challenge with this project will be getting people to comply.
Pardon me?
The biggest challenge with this project will be getting people to comply with the process and not contaminate the waste. So it's actually an investment to ensure that the project is actually successful. If you don't provide them the infrastructure, they're not going to participate.
I suppose if we didn't hand something like that out, people would tend to just put the organic in a plastic bag and then toss the bag in the bin?
Entirely possible, because cleaning out the
Yeah.
organic one is a job.
Right.
Sally was just indicating that Banff has actually gone to a compostable container, actually, so that you actually take the whole container and you throw the whole container into the process, and you don't need to recycle it. So that is something we could explore as well.
Huh?
If you give out just one plastic one, people put a liner in it, and then they throw just like a baggie in a small, they throw the
Right.
whole baggie in
Right.
with the organics.
So the
You need to manage people, is the point.
compostable, we would hand out
Endless.
hundreds of them to each?
Yeah.
Huh. So, how would this look if we wanted to phase it in and start slow with the residential that we've been talking about, and then introduce the commercial a year or two down the road?
Well, if a decision's made next month to go ahead with this, we are a couple years down the road before the program for both
A couple
systems.
years further down the road then?
Even further, yeah. We have landed on this system where we go full commercial, because if we're truly wanting to reduce the amount of organics that goes to landfill and all the benefits by doing that, including the methane production and the transferring to Camrose and back, the commercial sector has the highest volume of waste. It is the area we really, if we really want to have an impact that's convenient and efficient, because they generate the most, and it's a fairly concentrated waste stream, right? It's the downtown core, it's along Bow Valley Trail, and a few other spot locations.
And I understand that, but what certainty would we have from the commercial sector that we're going to get the long-term buy-in that we need to justify the bay expansion and those other expensive components?
Initially, we wanted to tackle this from a financial program and financial incentive. We're going to be providing a system. I think there'll be two factors. One, financial incentive. We want to be providing them with a program that's going to be less expensive than throwing their waste out. Because it's quite heavy, it's going to be quite beneficial. Their waste container is going to last a lot longer. The other piece is, we believe there's a lot of business owners in town who do want to make the right decision, and we will look at a system that will recognize these businesses, that they participate in the commercial organics program. So maybe it's a half-eaten apple that sits in their window that says, I participate in this program.
So, but perhaps to better answer your question, so if we look at the costs that are up there, and what are the costs that you have to incur to run any type of program whatsoever, and then what are the incremental costs on top of that to add additional components. So if you're going to do any type of collection within the community that we ourselves are going to manage, then we need to have the transfer station. So even if we did just the residential and no commercial, and we put the 5 bins out, we still need to go and collect those 5 bins, and then we still need to go take that to a transfer station, and we still need to deal with that. We did explore an option of looking at a partnership with Banff, because they have an organics project, and then there was some discussion about, well, could they come, drive to Canmore, collect from our bins, and then take it back to Banff and transfer it at where they're planning to transfer. That is something that we did explore somewhat. There were some mixed messaging on the extent to which that could be feasible for Banff. At least in the short term, it could be possible, and it's something that we could explore further. If we don't partner with Banff, then at the bare minimum, if we did just the residential, we would still need the bays for the transfer system. So that is where your bulk of your capital cost is, and you would still need the truck, and you would still need the operator. So then the question is then what is the additional incremental cost to extend it to the commercial program? So under the current proposal, we are expecting to be able to implement the project with 1 truck and essentially 1.5 operator to do both the commercial and the residential. So we need the truck regardless, we need the transfer regardless, and we need the bay regardless. So on the capital side of things, the only thing we could save by not doing the commercial now would be to eliminate the commercial collection carts. We still need the collection vehicle at $275, because we need at least one of those if we're going to roll out the residential process.
So, sorry, Mike, if I can just, the commercial collection vehicle is tied 100% to the commercial sector. We feel we have capacity within some of our existing fleet to do the residential piece.
Okay.
So that
Sorry,
would be
I
another one that
misunderstood.
could go.
Yes, okay, so that,
But what I'm hearing is the big expense, the big expansion, you're suggesting, outside of a deal with Town of Banff, that's gonna be required, whether or not we do commercial.
that's correct, because you need to transfer the waste from the collection vehicle
Sure,
to,
I understand that.
yeah.
So then a conversation would have to be had with Banff. And is there any opportunity to lock in the commercial sector before we actually put money into the ground?
I think it's difficult to lock someone in. You can go out and get a year or two contract, but, you know, they can always
I mean, I
cancel.
appreciate the fact that if there's gonna be a significant cost saving, they're likely to be supportive.
So, you know, what, some of the ways other municipalities have worked on this is because they control the entire commercial sector. So that's what happens in Banff. Banff does the collection for garbage as well as recyclables for the commercial sector. So you can then implement bylaws or other legislative tools to mandate separation, et cetera. Because we don't control the commercial sector, it will require us, as you're suggesting, to work with them to try to get buy-in to separate and to find space to store, and the motivation, as Andreas was suggesting, is the, you know, doing the right thing and the cost point. If it's cheaper to do it, to separate and get rid of your heaviest waste component, business, that should speak to businesses. But I guess a question to Andreas is, you, in answering Councillor Comfort's question about timing, you said it will take till about Q3 next year.
To begin.
To
go out to tender.
To go out to
To
tender.
start to
So,
commence.
you know, do you feel that there would be some time in that sort of 9 months to do some work with the commercial sector to see if there's interest, buy-in, and you know, a confidence level that if we build it, they will come?
Yes, to date, we have had a number of conversations with different commercial businesses, even ones beyond the ones that we included in the waste characterization study, and they've all expressed interest in doing it. So that's why there's, at least from solid waste services or public works side, there's a high degree of confidence that we'll get businesses to participate with the program. We haven't gone out to date because there hasn't been a decision to go ahead. Once the decision is made, we will certainly be going out there pounding on doors once we've finalized what our cost could be and start looking for that business and getting them aware of it so that they can start planning for it. But we just didn't want to do that until we had a project approved and supported by council.
So it seems to me for this to succeed, we can't do it in sort of a half-hearted way. Like, we can't say, well, we'll do a pilot, see how it goes, and we'll see if we can get the commercial sector to come in, because that's not going to inspire confidence.
well, and
I
further,
think.
and further, so if we just wanted to pilot the residential side of things, we could, in theory, do just the 5 bins, place them in the community, and then try to come to an agreement with the town of Banff to come and to collect it. So basically, it would be a Banff truck driving to Canmore and collecting it at those points and then taking it back and transferring it there and managing it. We could try to do that as a pilot on the residential side of things. But Banff has constraints, both in terms of time, but also in terms of volume. So they couldn't do a pilot on the commercial side of things because they couldn't handle the volume of commercial waste that would be produced. And they've been clear on that. They were saying 300 to 400 tons a year is what they could reasonably accommodate. So we could reasonably try that on the residential, but we couldn't do that on the commercial.
The commercial sector is about 1,500 tons.
Yeah, so if we just want to do the lightest possible intervention on a pilot to see how it goes, then the recommendation would be to just do the 5 residential bins and to come to an agreement with the town of Banff to get them to service it. And then we don't incur hardly any of the capital cost, we do incur very little of the operating cost. So that would be the lightest possible intervention, if that was the direction that council wanted to go in.
So But if we wanted to go sort of full tilt boogie, I think that we would have to have a very, very strong education and compliance program.
Right.
Otherwise, we're setting up ourselves from the examples of other municipalities for failure.
And we're actually not proposing to go the full program. So we're not proposing to do essentially the 60 residential bins that would mirror the other waste collection systems, precisely for that reason, because we don't want to do that additional extra investment until we get a sense for how the system will work, whether or not we can get compliance, whether or not we can get people to manage the amount of contamination that they put into the system.
Right.
So, but it's easier on the commercial side to manage that,
Yeah.
right? Because the commercial side will not be anonymous.
Yeah.
The residential side will be anonymous. People can go and throw their stuff in, and we can never trace that back to the homeowner.
Right.
But on the commercial side, the operator will essentially go to each business, and as he goes to tip the bin, he can look inside, and if he sees unacceptable levels of contamination, he can decline to take it.
Just out of curiosity, if we were to go that recycled or compostable bin route that Sally was talking about, could those compostable bins be stamped with a number, an identifying number, so that you could trace back the source?
That anything is possible, depending on how much you're
Given
prepared
the
to
time
spend
and
on
money.
it. But if you're going to try to assign those containers to a specific residence, then there's additional work and additional cost involved with such a system.
And someone would have to go through it,
Yes.
and we wouldn't
That would
expect
be
our,
job, wouldn't it?
Yes.
after today, yes.
We would anticipate that by providing them with a disposable collector, that in itself would be sufficient incentive to separate and to manage the contamination.
So I think the point I'm trying to make is, what would be our budget amount? And I think it was in the Cal report, I just can't remember. For communications and education, like learn at lunches,
No,
like.
so there's $50,000 in the budget, included in that 2.675 million, I believe,
Yep.
to do an education campaign.
60,000 in the budget.
50,000, 50, which is, I mean, not
Yeah.
a small amount of communication.
No, I just,
And sorry,
Yeah.
that would be that would be the initial to develop the campaign. And from our experience, we know that that is something that's going to have to be in the operating budget annually, because
Yeah.
we can never let up on
Okay.
that promotion education.
that was what I wanted to hear. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So I'm just exploring whether there could be another decision point in here, right? So that to allow the work on design and preparing of tender packages to get ready, but potentially also task administration with doing some outreach to the commercial sector and getting some kind of a commitment from the commercial sector, and so that we could have an understanding of demand.
So we would have to, I mean, it's certainly possible, and we would have to be clear on what the metrics are, though. So you would essentially be looking to get people to sign a forward contract for the disposal of waste, and so we'd have to make some decision around what would be success then. So what percentage of businesses or what volume of waste would we have to have contracts signed for, or if we're not doing a contract, then what is sufficient assurance for council that the project will be viable? So if it's not a contract system, then is it, because the team has already had conversations with the commercial sector and they've expressed an interest. So if we want a higher degree of confidence, we'd have to be clear on what that higher degree of confidence would have to come in, what form that
So
would
what's
take.
the measure?
That's right.
Sorry, I just wanted to correct, there's $20,000 in that capital budget for communication and education, not 50, yeah.
So to that point, Mike, I mean, I'm thinking back to 2007 when the town had spent 18 months at least in 2007 when we spent a better part of 2 years in a conversation with a builder who was going to come and build employee housing. You may remember some of that story.
Yes, I do.
And it was going to be a P3 sort of a thing, and it looked like an automatic. Why wouldn't it work? The businesses need employee housing. The town will work with the developer. There'll be employees in housing. All that was required was for the builder to go out and work with the business community and get some pre-lease agreements signed, nobody would sign them.
Yeah.
So they didn't have anywhere for the employees to live, but they weren't gonna sign and commit to a lease.
Yeah.
And that's my concern with this, is we're just expecting that it'll be automatic in the commercial sector, and
Well,
it should be.
So the difficulty, that's a great example, actually, because that illustrates the difficulty very well. The problem was getting them to commit in advance, right? And especially when you're talking, the farther out you're looking, the more difficult it is to get anybody to commit to anything, especially in writing. So on Palliser, they built employee housing with no commitments from any employer whatsoever. And that has been the most successful component of that development to date so far. Those units filled up first and quickly. So the demand was certainly there. It's just the, small businesses essentially are reluctant to sign a contract for something when it is not serving an immediate need today.
Or when it's not physically in place.
That's right. So to get them to commit to something that might be 2 years out is a challenge. Because people are going to say, no, I'll wait and see what happens. Right? They're not that forward thinking. And so I think the organics would be a similar scenario, is if we go out in early 2019 and we try to get them to sign forward contracts for waste disposal, knowing that the system won't come online until probably early 2020, you're going to have a low success rate in getting those businesses to sign those contracts because they're going to be reluctant. So then if we're not going to require a contract, then what is the level of assurance that council would accept? Becomes the question.
Yes, it does.
I could respond to that, but then I think I'd be entering into debate, and that's never a good idea, so.
Right you are.
This, as finance committee, you can certainly debate here. So,
really?
Yes, you
Okay, then.
absolutely can. We are going to have a couple of days of discussion and debate next week, but certainly administration needs direction to keep this in the budget, or to remove it, or to put some form of hybrid in it. You don't have to decide that today. There are 2 days next week where we will have discussion and debate, but you can start to think about what that might look like and what your preferences are, and yeah.
So what I would say in response is, sometimes if you know it's the right thing to do, and I believe there's a big, in the community, people think this is the right thing to do and they want to see it happen. Sometimes we have to take that leap as leaders.
Absolutely.
So I think this is where we are with this project.
Yeah, I'm not.
And there's never any guarantees, right?
No, I'm not thinking I'm at the point that I want to make a decision on A or B.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand the variables. To your point about what the community expects, we've certainly heard loudly over the last couple of years that the community expects residential composting, but I haven't heard any specific noise about commercial. But I understand how the commercial side of it has much greater impact. So I don't need to debate it myself right now, but
Yep.
back
Nope,
together.
that's good.
I thought I heard at committee of the whole that the commercial sector was consulted, and this would be a cost savings to them because you're picking up organics and taking it to a closer location. Is that?
Yeah, we
You're going to
expect,
save mileage on the transfer of the waste because you can take
Yeah,
it
we
closer.
understand there's a real positive impact on the bottom line for the commercial sector.
So there's an opportunity to save money, and that's usually a good incentive to do
I
so.
don't disagree,
Okay.
but we don't know until we actually
We don't
build it
and we will
start
have,
operating it.
and just so that we're clear and not painting too rosy of a picture, we will have some of the same challenges with the commercial sector as we would with residential.
Yeah.
So starting with the collection bins. So this would be a large collection bin, and then we'd have to talk about, well, are we going to supply them compostable garbage bags to go with, or is there some kind of system? Because if they're just dumping it straight into the large container, then that becomes an odor and contamination problem that they have to manage. They have to train their employees, they have to ensure compliance. We would have to manage for contamination to make sure that what we're getting is appropriate. So we're not overly romanticizing the commercial side either. What we're identifying is that both from a sort of waste management perspective, which council has set targets in terms of diversion of waste, and from an environmental perspective, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the commercial sector represents the largest area where we could realistically divert large amounts of organics out of the waste stream, right? And so that is, if those are goals that we want to set, if that's something that council wants to lead, this is the program that we feel finds the right balance between not investing too much in infrastructure, but doing the right amount of investment in infrastructure and giving us the highest possibility of actually accomplishing a reasonable diversion.
I mean, this project's exactly in the same league as putting a lot of solar voltaic on all of our buildings. It's a big capital investment, but we're agreeing on it because we know we have to as part of addressing climate change.
Right. And I would go further. There's an economic incentive as well. So the bays, for example, aren't required today to manage our current waste program, but if we don't do organics, in a number of years, 8, 10 years from now, they will be required as an expansion to accommodate our growth in waste. So the whole point here is that we are trying to find a different way to manage our waste system that could also be have financial benefits to the community in the long run by preventing from having to do landfill as well.
And maybe
landfill is expensive.
I can add to that. When we originally built the building, that was in 2014, there was space for 4 trans stores, which is the machine that we use to transfer, but we only installed 3 with growth in mind. So within 4 years, so last year we actually put in that 4th one. Okay. So to Mike's point, at some point, you're right, within the next 8 years, we are going to need to expand. We have no more capacity within the current facility as we grow.
Right. Whereas investing in organics now and investing in this expansion diverts some of the waste that is going through the current system into a different system, and so it allows, so there is an economic benefit there as well. I don't think it's quite as directly relatable as the solar, right, where you get a direct impact on your energy consumption, but there is definitely an economic benefit there as well.
Okay, thank you.
So, you know, I'm just sort of thinking and listening, and I'm just wondering if there's enough in that budget to do what we're talking about with the commercial sector. So if there's only $20,000 in that budget for education and outreach.
I understood it was 50, that's my bad. So
because really.
It was 50 when it was the full bore program. So we scaled that back because.
We scaled that back.
Yeah.
But I think really it's going to need an ambassador, full-time almost, to work with the commercial sector to, you know, because each commercial business will have a custom system for them, where they store, how they deal with their employees, what they're doing, and that will be a considerable amount of time. I'm just wondering if you and Simon could give some thought to that, and whether or not that budget needs to be adjusted. But yeah, I don't know what the answer is there.
Yeah, you know, another thing I'm remembering is when we rolled out the requirements for commercial operations downtown to block or to build little areas for their garbage bins. That didn't go well. There was huge pushback. People in this room. So you gotta really prepare the business community for that, so they can think about how it would benefit them and where they could put, in this case, the collection within their building.
And actually, it's a fair point also about looking at the budget once again. So as Rick has pointed out, there's nothing included in the current system for billing as well. So how we would bill the commercial sector, because it's expected to be primarily cost recovery. So although Public Works has done some implementation of that, and they don't think it expected to be overly onerous. They have a system for billing commercial businesses already that could be replicated. There may be some massaging of this number that needs to be done in the next week or so before we come to the final number. And I hadn't realized that we had reduced the education amount from 50 to 20 with this slightly scaled back system, so we may want to relook at that.
For that education component, is there any possibility of partnering with Biosphere Institute to roll out that message?
If we give them the money, yes.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, put that onus on another organization that's already doing that. No?
So everything comes with a cost.
Yeah, exactly.
So whether we implement it or we contract somebody else to implement it, there's going to be a cost associated with that.
Right.
There may be some benefits to working with Biosphere or potentially other groups as well. We would have to explore that.
Okay, good.
Okay.
I just feel I have to mention this. There's some very committed volunteers in the community that I would venture to call them waste warriors, that would be happy to assist in any kind of, and have approached the town over the last 3 years and are very knowledgeable, very experienced, and could be a real resource for us to use.
When I mentioned or other groups, that's actually who I had
Okay.
in mind, is because there was that group that actually came to council, had organized themselves, and were lobbying for an organics program, so there could be opportunities there. We'd have to explore that,
Yeah.
see what their capacity is,
Yeah.
and how that could work.
Yeah.
So what I've taken away is we'll go back and look at the promotion education to look to bump that and possibly look also, right now we're at 1.5 FTEs. Maybe we need to bump that back up to 2. The half an FTE would be supporting the commercial sector and supporting them in moving, transitioning, as well as the billing component. Yeah. But we'll evaluate that.
Thank you.
If there's nothing more on organics diversion, this is just a summary of the last couple of capital projects that are also being proposed. So we have some ventilation challenges with the new waste management center up in this corner where the staff are operating on the sort line, so we need to address that. And then the skid steer replacement, we have one right now. We need to look to replace that. It's come to its end of its useful life. The downtown depot, that is where the Save On Foods, we're having some challenges with the concrete and the asphalt, and we've got some issues with the steps and transitions for accessibility, so we want to redo that in 2019. Just to the right of this building, the Waste Management Center, we have a couple of sea cans where we're storing bales. So before they go to market, right now the market's at a low and we don't get trucks that often, and so we need to stockpile material. Our agreement with the province for this lease space is that we can't store anything outdoors, so we've adjusted by putting sea cans in there for the interim. They're fairly inexpensive, but they're very difficult to operate a skid steer into and out of each time. So what this bale storage building is a pre-engineered building that we'd be putting in place, so it'd be much easier to store bales and ensure that we meet the requirement to store all that material inside and manage the litter and noise that goes with that.
Sorry, where did you say the bale storage would be?
Just outside, so within the yard, just to the right of the corner here, along the fence line, we have 2 sea cans in there for storage.
Yeah.
We'd take the sea cans out and replace it with a formal pre-engineered building. Yeah, so it would be within the fence line.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So that's the concrete, like the concrete blocks with a nylon top. Yeah, with a electric door. And then also within the sort line, we have the contamination, you know, the products that are removed, the bottles, cans, the contamination issues that you saw when you went through for the tour of the Waste Management Center. Right now, those are sitting inside these nylon bags, which are difficult to move. And so we're looking at these carts on wheels, which are a lot easier for operators to move around and not have to operate equipment in there. So that's what that chute carts are for. And that's it on the capital side for solid waste services.
Easy peasy.
Any questions on any of that information, capital and operating, I suppose? Although we haven't handed out the operating sheets for that department, but this is the only time really we'll be talking about the operating expenses in utilities and solid waste services. So if there's questions about how those departments operate, or maybe Andres, the ask in 2019, even without organics in solid waste services, is 1 new FTE?
1 new FTE, yeah, to deal with contamination.
So mostly on the recycling
That's right.
side of things?
Yes.
Okay.
Would that person or that position, would that be for all recycling, like for the organics and for, or would there be, is that a separate issue?
It's not related to organics. In 2020, that's when we have currently 1.5 FTEs assigned to the organics diversion program.
Okay,
So
that-
one in 2019, nothing to do with organics, and then 1.5 in 2020, 100% related to organics.
Okay, and the other question I had was, in the charts, would it be possible to, there's just a couple of things that would make it easier to understand the information. So, for instance, the one where there's, I know it's obvious, but the reserve balance versus the reserve target, to say which is which, right on the chart. So they're just colored lines, but there's no, sorry, my editing got better at me. And then there was another one. Oh yeah, when you put the amount in for, you know, what represents the billing, can you say that it's 1 month or 2 months? Like, also again, it's pretty obvious, but for anyone in the public that's reading it, it might be confusing.
Sure.
So that's all I got.
Okay. Councillor Hillstead, Councillor Mara, this is the first time you've seen these utilities and solid waste services models and how they function. Any questions? Any,
Clear as mud?
is it clear how the rates are established and what the intention is that it's fully self-supporting? Okay.
No. They're gonna say yes, but they're really thinking, you know.
What?
Well, I think going through the buildings,
Helped.
I think going through the buildings makes a big difference because you're understanding, you're physically knowing what's going on in the process and why, and
Okay.
so that
Great.
really helped.
That's excellent. Okay, Andres, I know, because I've read your operating sheet, there was, for the utility side, the reference of EPCOR's contract coming to an end. Can you just speak to that? Because I think that's something that we want council to be aware of.
Sure. The current contract is set to, well, the term was to end mid-2019, but there is a mechanism within the contract to roll over. So at this point, that's playing out, but regardless of that, both parties at any point do have the opportunity to give 18 months notice if they wish to cease the contract. So we are now meeting with EPCOR to understand what the benefits would be for the town of Canmore to remain with EPCOR. And once we've gone through that analysis, administration will be coming to council with a recommendation on how we proceed with the service delivery for water utilities.
When do you think that might be?
It'll likely be within the beginning of 2019. Yeah.
And there's no impact at all on the budget that we're approving?
If we, those things we don't know yet.
Right.
Right now, the contract has formulas for how adjustments can be made. Those are factored into the utility budget. If there was anything greater than that, that would have to be negotiated with EPCOR, and then we would have to come back to council to allow that. But right now, as I said, it automatically rolls over, and there's mechanisms to make adjustments, and those are factored already. And if we were to do anything differently, we would certainly want to do it for less, if it was possible, than what we're doing right now. Again, not having an impact on the budgets.
Yeah, so, you know, part of the question is, should we be going out to retender, right? And there's a whole analysis of, is there any advantage of bringing it in-house? And those are very detailed and complex analysis, but going out to tender, it's been 20 years now that we've had EPCOR as a partner. You know, is it an appropriate time to potentially have them go through a competitive process again to bid on the contract?
Right, and going out to tender itself, especially on a project like this, is actually not a simple process. It's not something we have the capacity to manage internally. So we would actually need a project to hire a consultant to help us go through the tender process, produce tender documents for something this complex. It's not like RFPing for, you know, even legal services or procurement services, something simple. So we are looking at that. We are talking to other municipalities. So we are doing what we feel is a very robust review already. Both municipalities who continue to work with EPCOR and those who have recently made other decisions, and to see what their actual lived experience has been. And did they actually realize the savings that they thought they were going to realize, and what that looks like. So we're doing a thorough evaluation, and when that's complete, we'll come back to council and let them know.
And that'll happen in the new year, but again, it's not going to dramatically affect?
It won't affect this budget also because, as Andreas mentioned, it's an 18-month notice period. So even if we decided we wanted to move forward with tendering, we would have to give them 18 months notice. There would be a competitive process, and it may be that they end up being successful, and we would continue.
And when was it the contract expires?
End of 2019.
Mid-2019.
Oh, mid-2019.
Yeah.
No.
So the 18-month notice period started?
It could start at any time.
Yeah. So there is an 18-month notice period at any time built into the contract. So at any time that we want to essentially go out to market again, we can give them 18 months notice. It doesn't have to coincide with the renewal of the contract.
I see.
Yeah, and as Mike was talking,
If we don't do that before that expiry date in 2019, then it's an automatic renewal.
But it's not, so we've already missed the 18-month in advance of the end of the contract period. So it is, the contract is renewing automatically regardless. The reality is that if we had wanted to go out to tender before the automatic renewal, we would have had to have given them 18 months notice prior to the renewal date. So the 18 months is fixed no matter what the scenario is. So there was no pressure, there was no urgency to going out to market now to prevent the rollover of the contract, because we can do that at any time with the same notice period.
But if the contract rolls over in 2019, it would be for another 10-year period or something?
It would be for another 10 years, but at any time in that 10-year period, we can give them 18 months notice.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Okay.
just like the last 10, we could have done that as well.
Yes.
We could have exercised that.
Yeah. So we're not locked in for the 10 years as an absolute. At any time, we can give them 18 months notice and say, and they are aware. So we've been very transparent with EPCOR that we are exploring the value for money, that we want to really understand that. As Andreas has pointed out, they are very keen on maintaining the relationship with Canmore. They are trying to bring a parade of sort of high-level delegates to come and to meet with us and to help us understand the value that they provide the town of Canmore. So, yes.
And just to help with that, you know, like Mike mentioned, we've been speaking with other municipalities who have been faced with a similar decision. So the town of Okotoks in the spring made a decision to bring the service in-house after their internal review. But we don't know the details of how likely or the reality of what they've proposed because that doesn't happen for another year. Because they've given the 18 months notice. So they won't effectively take over the utility until the beginning of 2020, and then that'll be another conversation for us to ask, depending on where we go between now and then.
Right. And then you got to give them a couple of years to let it play out.
Yeah. However, Banff has recently moved away from EPCOR and has taken their facility in-house. And so we have had conversations. We have ongoing conversations with them as well. What our analysis shows at this point is that there is some potential for savings, but that the margins are thin and there are risks associated with it. So I don't believe administration currently has a predisposition to bringing it in-house, but what we do want to do is do our due diligence, also to inform any potential negotiations about what things in the contract might change. Right? So we're looking at all aspects of it.
Good.
That transitioned quite some time ago, about a decade, wasn't it?
No.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, just 2 years?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was just the wastewater side.
It was just the wastewater side.
Yeah, they were still doing the water themselves. Yeah.
Okay.
So a reminder that on Thursday, we are going to go through in some detail the operating budget. Rick has a whole package for you to put in tab 4 and prepare for your review. The 3 GMs will be giving presentations on Thursdays on the details of that budget. And then the following week we get into discussion and debate. So if there's any questions, we can start that next week or on Thursday if there's time as well. But okay, so before I lose everybody's attention, I'm going to make a motion to adjourn the committee. Those in favor to adjourn? Councillor Sanford, do you want to adjourn? She's not paying any attention.
Yeah, she wants to adjourn.
We're adjourned. Thank you.
Adjourned.